Well, good afternoon, everybody, and it's really good to see so many familiar faces and friends in the graduating class and out there and up here. Chris, Everett, Your Excellency. And it's a real pleasure to be with you this afternoon on this very special and this very happy Future Generations Day. And so, first of all, before anything, congratulations to you all in the graduating class. And you've come together from across the world for this very, very special day. Most of you are already established community development leaders and practitioners, and you've spent the last couple of years building further on your capacities by taking the master's program in applied community change and peace building of future generations, of what I call the magical and innovative future generations. And some of you know I've already also called it the non-organization organization. It's not about structure, it's about approach, it's about connections. You're part of a small but growing network of change agents who have come together under the banner of future generations. You are change agents. You're game changers. And you're the seeds of change, and you're the people who are changing and will change your communities, your countries, and your world. So for me, you are representatives of seed scale. And if ever the world needed you and your knowledge and your learning and your community-based experience and leadership, it's today. It won't surprise you that I'm going to draw a few lessons and a few parallels from where I am now, looking at the humanitarian crisis in Syria in all its ugliness, but also in all its hope for the many people who are trying to make change in even the most difficult circumstances. I must say the Globe Theatre is quite a long way from Syria, yet I have to say it just takes a few hours to get here. Because of the time difference, I got on a plane at 1:30 in the morning on Wednesday, and I was here 10:30 the same morning. So actually not long. So think about it. When you think crises are far away, they're actually right on our doorsteps. The world and world events are much closer to each of us than we think. And you know that. You're on the front lines. Syria. What do people around the world see when they think of Syria? A terrible, unrelenting civil war, yes. A pitiless regime which has always oppressed its opponents ruthlessly, which has always cracked down on dissent and is still doing so today, which accuses its ordinary citizens of terrorism just because they yearn for a voice in the future and for representation in the government of today. What else do we see? We see an opposition now increasingly dominated by extremism, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda. Okay, another Muslim country in crisis. Why is Islam such an extremist religion, people say? Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, suicide bombings, extremists. That's the narrative that most people see and most people hear, people who are not Muslims think about. Those who follow Syria in the news see a dominant narrative of hatred between Sunni and Shia, between Muslim and Christian. A sectarian war, with reports of ethnic cleansing, movements of population, of Sunni, of Shia, of Christians, to areas where they feel safe, where their own group and their own belief systems predominate. And yet, till very recently, it wasn't like that in Syria. Despite its dictatorship, Syria has, over the years, been a country where people of different congregations and different faiths have lived in relative harmony. But the crisis itself has fostered so much hatred, and it's now increasingly characterized by those of us on the outside as a sectarian war which pits Sunni against Shia, Christian against Muslim, liberal against radical Islamist. This crisis, this civil war, started off as the expression of just ordinary people, ordinary Syrians, through peaceful protests, and all they wanted was more liberty, more freedom of expression, less repression, less corruption. and Sunni and Shia and Christian 2.5 years ago were demonstrating together. But the Syrian regime, dominated by the Shia Alawite minority, cleverly picked the targets of their devastatingly cruel repression and reprisals. And they targeted Sunni Muslims in particular, and therefore starting to sow amongst the people who were demonstrating for liberty, starting to sow difference. Why am I as a Sunni getting reprisals and you're not as a Shia and you're not as a Christian? So they very skillfully started to sow the elements of distrust. And these seeds of sectarianism were further fanned by fighters coming from the outside on both sides, and by intervention from other states in the region and beyond, to a point where you have to wonder whether there is a way back from this vicious separation that is taking place between neighbors who previously lived together in relative harmony. There's ethnic cleansing once again, and in the meantime, almost 7 million people have been affected, displaced, or turned into refugees. So why is this global narrative about Islam dominated by these negative perceptions? The voices and the action of extremism have captured the narrative. And yet it's really important for us to know that despite this very visible violence and intolerance, there are still many people, the majority of Muslims, who are living in this world who want harmony. The people you hear about, the extremists, the people who sow division, they are still in a minority, and it's really important to remember that. But we don't hear enough about the majority, Muslims who believe in tolerance, in moderation, in harmonious living together, and in mutual respect. I wouldn't call them the silent majority, I would call them the silenced majority. In North America, in many parts of Europe and elsewhere in the non-Muslim world, I would suggest that they are being silenced, amongst others, by our own mainstream media. How often do tolerance, peaceful coexistence, community harmony, how often do these make the headlines? Not very often. They're not dramatic. They're not newsworthy. And yet, all over the Muslim world and beyond, there are ordinary people and brave people, tolerant Muslims, calling out for understanding, for mutual respect, for peaceful coexistence between communities and between nations. What you have been living, working, and studying in recent years. Remember the Arab Spring? Those many voices in many countries demanding democracy, representation, freedom from authoritarian rule. What's happening today? In Egypt, a dictator, Mubarak, was deposed. The Muslim Brotherhood and a new president came to power, elected by the majority of Egyptians. But today, that president and that government have in turn been overthrown in a military coup. The military has banned the Muslim Brotherhood. Its supporters are ruthlessly repressed. And the military leaders are the one who are again capturing the narrative and drawing the battle lines. There is a fight between the secular world and Islamic extremists, between security and terrorism. But in the end, what is this repression going to do? Even in Syria, President Assad claims to be fighting terrorism as his forces besiege and pulverize cities and communities in a desperate and determined effort to stay in power. Intolerance and violence dominate the narrative. It's been a long introduction. It sounds pretty gloomy, but I want to tell you that there are people out there, there are other voices out there, and they include voices of communities that you live in, but they also include the voices of many people that work and live in the communities which seem to be dominated by intolerance. Let's take Libya. We all followed the war, the fall of Muammar Gaddafi, and later the attack on the US diplomatic representation in Benghazi, the murder of US envoy Christopher Stevens, a man who loved Libya and was loved by many Libyans. But what's the main message that comes out of that? Libya, violent Arab Libya, violent Muslim Libya. violent Islam. But there's another story that needs to be